Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's training. My name is Dr. Kasia Kleins. I'm CEO and founder of EBV Global Institute, and it is my pleasure today to talk about a hot topic, Epstein-Barr virus and Candida. We're going to talk about 5 common and less common reasons why you may have Candida overgrowth, some ideas around those. In particular, we're going to focus on the last one, which is mold exposure. And I will make suggestions about a couple of labs you may want to investigate and some resources we created to educate yourself and get the needed support. So Candida albicans is one of the fungi species that we cohabit with, so to speak. So we do have it a little bit, but it is an opportunist, so it will tend to overgrow when there is fertile ground, so to speak. So there's other species as well and subspecies, but this is most commonly what you would discuss with a doctor, what you have problems with. So the first and most obvious reason why you can have overgrowth is antibiotics. While antibiotics target and kill bacteria, they don't touch Candida because it's a fungus. As a result, if you imagine that you have, the intestinal lining, which is populated with microbiome, it's not sterile. So all kinds of species will live there. And if you have an antibacterial antibiotic therapy, that medication will wipe out all your bacteria, good or bad. And so you will have all these available parking spots. And who's going to take them? The Candida, because antibiotic doesn't touch it. And sometimes medical doctors will kind of preventively target antibiotics, assuming that you have bacterial infection. Just keep in mind that if it's a viral infection, antibiotics are absolutely useless. They don't touch viruses either. If you've had antibiotics, you want to work with a functional practitioner or clinical nutritionist who is versed in probiotics and kind of customize probiotics for you. But it does take time. It does take good fiber rich diets to rebuild your bacteria. And you want to know that probiotic supplementation doesn't mean that you repopulate your specific microbiome. Your microbiome is your own. It's like a DNA or like a fingerprint. Everybody has a specific one. And so you want to understand that probiotic supplementation is a little bit like eating yogurt with cultures. As long as you take probiotics, they will change the pH, they will reshuffle the microbiome, but eventually they will not, they will die out because they don't belong to your internal microbiome. So your microbiome will regenerate on its own based on that pH, based on the food you eat, based on, lower stress and so on. So hopefully, I don't see that a lot of people with chronic EBV are provided with antibiotics in error instead of focusing on the virus. So I don't think that's most common, but what is more common with EBV are co-infections. And if you're working with functional practitioners or medical doctors, you may have gotten a stool test and you may have seen that you have strep overgrowth or staph overgrowth or, some other opportunistic or potentially autoimmune causing bacteria in the gut. And so a functional doctor may target those with maybe botanicals like olive leaf extract or others instead of antibiotics. So these can also, some of the antibacterial botanicals might also disrupt your good bacteria flora. So, that's a conversation to really have with your doctor. So the co-infections are common, unfortunately, bacterial co-infection and the disruption in the microbiome and overgrowth of other bacteria in the gut when people have chronic EBV. The second reason you may have problem with Candida is if you are on a very high protein diet, consuming a lot of meat, and consuming meat that is commercially resourced, so factory farming resourced. the problem with that is that antibiotics are produced, there's more antibiotics produced for factory farmed animals prophylactically because it's a very sick and unsustainable environment for them. So they are fed antibiotics on a regular basis than the production for human consumption. So that can lead to antibiotic resistance. You'll have the antibiotic residue in meat, actually, and that's been recorded. So then when you need antibiotics, they may not work. So that also may lead to Candida overgrowth. Number 3, more commonly, hypochlorhydria. That means that the stomach is not producing enough stomach acid. And stomach acid is really essential. I can't stress it enough. Too much is not a good idea, but most people, rather than have excessive, have lower stomach acid. And please understand, if you have heartburn or GERD and you have acid coming up into the esophagus, it still doesn't mean that you have excess acid. You still may have underproduced acid just getting into the esophagus where it shouldn't. So that's a different story. So be very, very careful with that. But commonly, hypochlorhydria happens as we age. So I would venture to say that majority of senior population, like when you are 70, 80 years old, really has underproduced stomach acid, and that can have huge repercussions in your age, including mimicking Alzheimer and cognitive decline because of the glaring B12 deficiency. And so that can be really confusing. This is hypochlorhydria is a prime example when your candida will overgrow. So that's something that I work with a lot because it's pretty common. The extreme case of hypochlorhydria would be achlorhydria, which is oftentimes caused by an autoimmune condition called pernicious anemia. Pernicious anemia is life-threatening. So if you chronically are underweight, if you're working with doctors trying to keep the weight and put it on and you struggle and you can only eat 2, 3 foods, you are notoriously reactive to everything. If you are in a red zone, so to speak, medically, and nobody can figure it out, if your presentation is a little bit like bad case of celiac, maybe your doctors have mentioned this, maybe we should check for celiac because you are really compromised. If you fail to thrive, so to speak, in medical terms, you really should talk to your doctor. Very simple test, 2 antibodies test for pernicious anemia to see if that is. Unfortunately, pernicious anemia I see once in a while in our EBV community, especially people that are really, really sick. So that can be life-threatening. That's like on extreme level of not the stomach acid not being produced because there are antibodies to the cells that are supposed to produce it. All right. Number 4 is excess iron. It may happen through iron infusions. If you are anemic and you need iron, you have to be very careful. Discuss that carefully with your provider before you pump that infusion. So, if you have a need of iron because your life is in danger, you have to do it, obviously. But if you have options, please discuss them because iron infusion can be extremely dangerous. So discuss the risks, pros and cons with your doctor. So excess iron can really feed candida. It can be very inflammatory. And so that can trickle into candida overgrowth as well. Last but not least, the biggest one, the biggest bombshell I'm going to drop on you is mycotoxins, mold exposure from water damage. Unfortunately, 50 or more % of buildings, commercial homes, have water damage in their history. And unfortunately, candida will overgrow. We call it active candida colonization. I'm going to explain how you can figure out if you have that issue. I have to say that of all the triggers that can cause EBV reactivation, like a serious one, I think mold exposure is one of the biggest. and hardest. So I will always say, we have a huge subpopulation in EBV community that actually have chronic EBV, possibly because of that mold exposure. Sometimes that's the triggering event. It really throws you on your back. It really compromises you. There's very few things that do that. And I would say, on the scale of what is a priority, EBV or mold, if you have both, I would always say mold. And which one is easier to work with? I work with both. I've been helping people with mold for many years. Had my bout of 5 years, 4 different homes, 4 mold exposures, actually 5, 2 remediations in different home. It's like I understand the complexity of it. But I would say the priority, what is more important and what is more urgent and what is more difficult is mold. When we compare, like in my practice, in my experience, for me, working with a person with EBV by itself without mold is easy. It's straightforward. We have a process in a program. It's, you're going to recover. But if you have mold and EBV, like the immediate need is remove yourself from that environment and then remediate or get rid of that environment, move on, which is what I had to do 4 times in 5 years, exactly for that reason. So that is really hard. And this is where the hardest, more complicated stories will be, where you really are going in circles and cannot get better. And even if the practitioners put you on protocols, antiviral protocols, it's just you're not getting the results that even they expect you to get. Really, really, this is where you should figure out if mold is the case. And I can't impress upon you the importance of this piece. There's so many people in my community that have worked with me where, based on very detailed history and conversations and digging more and asking more and understanding the environment in which the person has lived, understanding the medical conditions, understanding EBV presentations, understanding all the causative factors. When I had to say, okay, listen, there's got to be mold. I know this is mold. It just makes sense. This has to be mold. And in so many cases, my students would say, no, I don't have mold. Everything is fine. Only for me to get an email a few months later. It's like, funny that you said that. My husband was working on the sink in the kitchen, had to open the sink, and sure enough, there was mold. And that really is where your healing journey can start. And the mold is the dreaded word. We don't want it. Nobody wants it. I didn't want it. I didn't want to move 4 times. I didn't want to get, I had to go to ER with a lizard skin and so on and so forth. It is really much tougher than EBV. So I urge you to look under the hood and see, could that be my issue? One of the red flags I've noticed in the recent few years is people having chronic autoimmunity, chronic complicated, issues in brand new homes when they are the first owner. And it takes about 1, 2, 3 years, and then they get really, really sick. I'm not sure what's happening, if that's a trend, but I suspect that it's the building materials, it's cutting corners, and it's lack of craftsmanship. In Poland, where I grew up, we built in bricks. But here, the materials used for building homes are prone to harbor moisture. And, it's like feeding mold. And I know sometimes they build in the rain and they don't protect the structure from the elements from the rain during building. So anyway, that's like a rabbit hole. I don't want to go into it. But what to do and how to assess if you have mold or not, and what to do with it. Sometimes it's like burning house. You have to just leave everything. But sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes, you have to discern. How do you know? How do you know to prioritize A or B? How how to prevent getting into a rabbit hole and a very emotional and devastating rabbit hole. So because I've helped people so many years, and plus the recent years, I had to go through that myself. We actually have a masterclass series, an EBV masterclass series. It's about $150. And there are 4 parts, and one of the parts is EBV and mold. You have about 40 pages of PDF, very relevant materials. There's materials based on medical conferences, including what medical doctors will recommend, what are the best practices for antifungal medications, because you will need those. I hate to say it, if you have mold because of that Candida colonization, what tests to take, what remedies, how to remedy your home, and so on and so forth. There's about 2 hours of video when I lecture on it. So it may be really helpful for you just to go through that, have a reference frame. So when you start on that journey, you kind of know your ropes and you know to avoid the biggest emotional pitfalls, which is complete shutdown and overwhelm, which is understandable. So the last thing I want to add to this training is labs for mold. So there's a couple of cool labs that your functional doctor can order. Great Plains labs now are called Mosaic Labs. Most functional practitioners are aware of this lab. They have 2 urine tests that I would recommend. They have the best organic acid test. We call it OAT, oats. This is the best oat. Other labs have it, but this is the best oat test if you can get it from them. There will be some markers that indicate that there is mycotoxin exposure, and there are 2 markers that suggest Candida colonization. And mostly Candida colonization will be caused by that mold exposure, especially if you have those mycotoxin markers also elevated in that test. So the marker for Candida is arabinose, and then there's also oxalates. If oxalates and arabinose are both elevated, then most likely, and then you have a couple of markers for mycotoxins that are elevated in the red zone, then you definitely need to test your home for mold and go through, the whole journey. When there's mold exposure, just Candida starts colonizing, and colonization means it's actively reproducing and like going for it. It's like a party time. Oxalates will often elevate because of that Candida colonization. If you have those oxalates, it doesn't mean that you have to be on oxalate low diet. This is all like you have to really look at the cause. So yeah, these are issues that you want to discuss with your functional practitioners. I'm just signaling a few so you have kind of a working map and somewhere to start. And I really encourage you to investigate our EBV Masterclass series, to just grab your resources. Really, really priceless. I think it will help you discern where to start, what to ignore, what to prioritize. There's all kinds of information that will really help you strategize. So with that, yeah, Candida and EBV are huge. I wish you not having Candida issue, just EBV, then that's easy process. An EBV recovery program is all you need, or you can start with my book, EBV Solution. But otherwise, if you do have to struggle with Candida, check that information out, and hopefully it will help you. And I'll see you on the next training. Thank you, guys.